If you need to qualify a potential supplier and you want to have a factory audit done, the first two questions are, is it possible to send someone, and do they accept to be audited? Well, in these times of COVID pandemic in certain countries, that's a problem. So in some cases we have to do e-audit, like remote audit, asking for some procedures, for some records, interviewing people, asking how they do things. Not as good as being on site, of course, but it does give an idea, at least about their competencies and their understanding of what they should do. There's also some other ways to qualify a potential supplier without going there, even without them knowing it, checking their legal records. Certain countries where a lot of information is actually available in government databases. Now, let's say it's possible to send someone, but they don't really want to be audited. And we saw that, for example, with some of these masks and gloves factories that say, no, we're too busy, we don't care. You take the order, or we give the goods to somebody else. So in that case, in some cases, we had to say, well, we're going to do a factory visit. Can we do a factory visit? We'll write some comments. And then when we're there, if we can be in touch with someone, we can ask them a few questions. Actually, it's a little bit of auditing, but usually without a grading at the end or without anything that looks too scientific. But usually when we visit, the auditor can just say it's a visit, walk around, say a few comments in the reports, and apply some of the checkpoints that he usually applies during an audit, but maybe in a more informal way, still trying to gather some information. Okay, now let's say it's okay. You can go to factory and they accept to be audited, which is the most common case. Really, the question is, what do you want to know? What do you need to know about this factory? Do you want to focus on their quality system and their production processes and their supply chain processes and things like that? Is it very focused on social compliance? Maybe on their capacity to make your orders? Maybe it's more about can they make it in-house versus subcontracted? And there's some other kinds of audits about maybe social compliance and environment, right? There's more and more focus on their ability and willingness and record of environmental friendliness. All right, so if we talk about their quality system, if it's a small factory, there's no need to go very much in depth. If it's a very small factory anyway, they might not have any quality system or anything, so usually we would ask something like, hey, do they have an ISO 9001 certification? How many people work there? What kind of product? And then if we have a feeling that there's not going to be much, then there's no need to go in depth again. A more simple kind of evaluation, certain things that will check, obviously. Do they actually document a standard for the customer, and do they have approved samples, and do they train their workers and their inspectors, and how do they do the inspections, and how do they qualify their suppliers and things like that, but without going much in depth. When it's a mid-size or large factory, then we can go more in depth. We call it technical and quality audit. It is still very much what people call a quality management system audit, QMS audit, but not focused on following the requirements of ISO 9001 or another one of the standards. Usually what we do is something based on our own checklist, based on what we saw as relatively important to buyers. And then if you want a more in-depth check, really by an engineer on the systems and processes, and really spending a lot of time on the factory floor, then we call it a technical process audit. And really it is looking at their process controls, their preventive maintenance, staff training, and things like that, and the instruments and gauges, and basically all of these things that are quite important if you really want to reduce the risks of having non-conforming goods shipped to you. And sometimes we do programs. For example, technical process audit, if we come back maybe once a month, for example, and we tend to focus on different parts of their systems, usually it's called a layered process audit, LPA, layered process audit. It's just a way of keeping some pressure on them. It does help. In other cases like this, it might be more like a biannual or annual re-audit with a little bit more focus on the issues that were found last time. This is also quite common. Okay, now, social compliance. Basically, you don't want any of your suppliers to have child labor, forced labor, and very, very dangerous operations with people working without any protective equipment, these kinds of things. You don't want that. This is the kind of news that can be very detrimental to your brand. Usually we do what we call a social compliance audit. So we haven't really followed up with all the retailers' very specific requirements and with all of the standards that have appeared. This is still mostly based on SA 8000 and local law. Social compliance is not a main area of focus of our firm, so we do some, but we are not the best specialists. And in some cases, what I call overview here, what we call the technical and social audit, tends to be sort of a blend, a little bit of technical and quality audit, a little bit of social compliance audit, trying to focus only on the most important. If it has to be in only one day on site, obviously it has to be a little bit lighter, right? That's why we call it overview. If it can be 2 or 3 days, of course, then it can go more in depth. Do they have the capacity to make the orders? There's also another kind of audit that is useful when you're not sure the factory is actually ready to make your orders. Do they have the right equipment? Do they have enough staff and so on, right? And capacity. Based on what we see, we try to isolate the bottleneck process step, and we observe how many pieces are made there. This is something we also do in the technical and quality audit, by the way, but this one is really focused on all of these aspects. So that's it for the general presentation. Now, when we talk about factory audit, always keep in mind you want to make sure you qualify your direct supplier, your tier 1 supplier, the one that will send the products to you, that will ship, that will do maybe just the final assembly. But you will also rely on tier 2 suppliers, sometimes even tier 3 suppliers that you may have to qualify also. And the same thing again can be done, right? And then you can tell your direct supplier, okay, I accept that you purchase this component only from that one supplier. You direct the component supplier basically. So this can be done at several stages in your supply chain, not just on your direct suppliers. All right, that's it. I hope it was clear. Let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.